Hey leader, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Baritone Advisors. We also recorded this episode live from the new Return.com studio. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our interviews over on our YouTube channel, so make sure you're subscribed there as well. And as always, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's made an impact on your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, leader, in today's episode, you'll hear my interview with four-time Super Bowl champion Jon Kolb. If you're unfamiliar with Jon, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Jon Kolb was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers out of Oklahoma State in 1969. He played with the Steelers from 1969 to 1981. Overall, Kolb started at offensive tackle in 177 games and earned 4 Super Bowl rings during the 1974, 75, 78, and 79 seasons. During his playing days, Kolb was widely regarded as one of the strongest men in the NFL and played one of the strongest, protecting Terry Bradshaw's blind side from his left offensive tackle position and opening holes for running backs like Franco Harris, Rocky Bleier, and others. Like many of the Steelers players of the 70s, Jon had his own cadre of fans known as Kolb's Cowboys. Kolb competed in the second and third annual World's Strongest Man competitions in 1978 and 79, finishing in the top 3 both times. After his playing career ended, he became an assistant coach with the Steelers, working in different capacities as the line coach, tight ends coach, defensive line, and also a strength and conditioning coach. Kolb currently resides in Hermitage, Pennsylvania with his wife, Deborah, and he's currently running a nonprofit called Adventures in Training with a Purpose, which is an organization focused on helping those most in need to improve their quality of life through an adventure of purposeful physical training. And in our conversation, you'll hear Jon share some of his favorite memories and stories from playing with the Steelers, and he tells a story about almost killing Terry Bradshaw that is absolutely hilarious, so you're going to love that. He'll share what he learned from Chuck Noll, how faith played a part in his journey, and so much more, and I just think you're going to love this conversation. But before we dive in, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Baritone Advisors. The financial advisors at Baritone Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Baritone Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baritoneadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Baritone Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny, and my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers and had an incredible experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And I also want to thank our new sponsor, Return.com. And leader, let me just ask you this. Have you ever had an interest in investing in real estate? Well, now for as little as $500, you can become a commercial real estate investor. Just visit Return.com to learn more. That's REITURN.com. Investing involves risk. Please consult the Return Offering Circular if you're interested in investing. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Jon Kolb. Jon Kolb, it is quite an honor to be with you. I didn't mention this before we started recording, but the first time I met with you was several years ago. I think you were speaking at a Big C breakfast, and I didn't realize it, but my dad told me that you were his favorite player to watch for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He used to have season tickets, and he would literally spend the whole game with his binoculars on you, watching you destroy people. And so this is a great, great honor. And I want to start. So for those who don't know, you're a 4-time Super Bowl champion for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I just thought it would be great to start off with. Do you have a favorite Super Bowl or maybe a favorite moment for your career that you like to share?
Well, people will ask that. My college roommate, we go back in Oklahoma, they have a high school all-state game. So Terry and I met in the high school all-state game. We became friends, and at that game, then we went to, we both assigned to go to Oklahoma State University. We were roommates, and then he's drafted by the Vikings. I'm drafted by the Steelers. And so we played against each other in the first Super Bowl.
Wow.
And I could take up all the time. But I snapped punts. He was the short man on their punt return. So that's when we were on the field together. And so Roger Worley was the punt returner, and he's the short guy. So if the punt's short, Terry would catch it. But Bobby Walden, he was launching them. And so I'm watching the deep guy that catches the ball, Roger Worley, and Terry steps off. He just kind of goes off out of my sight to set up the wall. And here comes Roger, catches and starts this way, bang. And my roommate, the best man in my wedding, blindsides me.
Oh, man.
And I think there's a lot of things there. One of them is that's the way football's played. I used to go on, I went on USO tours a couple times with Joe Klecko, and the games were much more violent after we became friends than they were before that. It's just that's the way football's played. So I think perhaps just that no matter what you do, I think there's always a relationship factor in it.
That's cool. You were also on the field for one of the most famous plays in NFL history, the Immaculate Reception. What can you just take us there? What was it like to be on the field and see that transpire, if you even got to see it?
Yeah, so I think here's the thing that I think is amazing. To get into that game, we had to beat San Diego in San Diego the week before. And so there was a lot of pressure. I mean, we have to win this game or we don't get to call the Immaculate Reception. So before the San Diego game, we're sitting, we have a chapel service. And the chapel speaker, and I can't think of his name right now, but he started off and he asked us, do you pray before the game? And Ray Mansfield was the oldest guy on the team. And he says, yes. And so then he says, well, what do you pray for? And so Ray gives him that Mary Poppins, answer. And he says, well, I pray that nobody gets hurt and the best team wins and this kind of stuff, And he goes, oh, really? The best team wins. He says, don't you want to win? And Ray goes, yeah. And he says, well, why do you, and this is what the lesson was about. Why do we pray and hold what is really in our heart behind our back as if God can't see it? And then we offer God in our prayers garbage stuff that is not in our heart, like we pray the best team wins or nobody gets hurt. I mean, I didn't want somebody to get hurt, but and so the thing was about praying from your heart. The Bible in Romans 8 it says that we say Abba, Father, Daddy, and that was the lesson. So we beat San Diego. We're ahead of Oakland the entire game. Craig Hanneman loses containment on Kenny Stabler. He runs up the field, and with less than a minute to go, we're behind. We run 3 incomplete passes, and now there's 7 seconds on the clock. And Terry calls the Immaculate Reception play, and as we break the huddle, Ray Mansfield goes, somebody forgot to pray to win. And I will never forget that. Huh. And one of the things that's kind of, for me, sad is Ray Mansfield's gone. Mm-hmm. Sam Davis is gone. All the guys that probably would have heard that are no longer living. Mm-hmm. But I remember that. And then I kid Franco, you get a statue at the airport, and I set up the play because my guy jumps inside. It makes Terry step to his right just long enough to get Franco down the field. That's what I tell everybody. So without me sacrificing, Franco, you wouldn't have become the hero and get a statue at the airport.
So do we need a statue of Jon Kolb at the airport right next to hold off on that. So beautiful you got to be a part of that. And I just want to start with a bunch of fun stories, just, as we highlight your career. I've heard you tell the story many times, but it's probably one of the greatest stories I've ever told. Can you tell the famous story about when you brought Terry Bradshaw to, I think it was your ranch or a ranch? Can you just share that story? I just think listeners need to hear it.
One of the things, and I think that was amazing about our team is we had, if you were a white guy at that time playing for the Steelers, you were a minority. I thought that was kind of cool. I mean, the way the team today, we have to use words like adversity and stuff like that. That's the wrong word. The word is purpose, goal. Let's getting a group together to accomplish something. And that's what it was like. But nevertheless, there were guys on the team that had different, like Frenchie Fuqua and L.C. Greenwood. We called him Bags, Hollywood Bags. But those guys were dressers. I mean, they'd come to practice all dressed up. And then there were guys like Andy Russell and his group, and they were the investors. And so before practice, the investors would be in a group. We had a group of hunters, and Terry wanted to get in that group. That was the man's group, and he never knew how to fit. And so we were roommates. And that night, he was asking me questions that Jerry Mullins and a couple of the other guys, Jack Lambert was a hunter, still is, were talking about. And so we were going back and forth, and he said, well, I never shot a deer. And I'm going, my gosh, in Pennsylvania, you never shot a deer? And you go, so anyway, I told him, come out to the farm, and I'll tie one up, is what I said. I'll tie him one up so that you can for sure shoot it. So anyway, he was late getting out there. I'd already fed the cattle. I was actually going to get ready and go in to work out. And here he comes. And so then he's in the barn, and he's looking at one of the horses, and I'm explaining this is a horse that I rope with. So he said, rope something. And I went, okay. I saddled the horse. I told him to go across the pasture, take off running. I'm a lineman, okay. And he takes off running, but he started it. He goes, he's looking over his shoulder, and he goes, you can't catch me. I'm on a horse with 4 legs. He got 2 legs. And so, in about half a second, I'm right up on top of him, and I roped him, popped the slack, and he's standing there roped. And so now I got to get the rope off of him, but he keeps walking up to the horse, and she keeps backing up. So I kept saying, Terry, stay there, stay there. And he didn't understand that. So my second mistake after roping him was I got off the horse, and I go to take the rope off, and then he goes, oh my gosh, what happens if she spooks? Well, that spooked her, and out the pasture she goes. And if you've ever been to the Three Rivers Regatta, you see that spray behind the boat?
Yeah.
She was pulling him so fast, the dew on the grass was all this spray was popping up, and he's going, help, help, as they go out the pasture. And anyway, so there's a barbed wire fence, and I thought, oh my gosh, she's going to run through the fence, and she didn't. She came back around, and on the second loop, I tried to grab the horse, and I missed. And I grabbed the rope, so now she's pulling both of us. And the thing that saved us was he had put the wrong reins on. He put split reins on, and one of them was dragging. I was able to grab the reins and let loose of the rope, and that spun her around. She just starts eating, and I look over there, and he's like not moving.
Oh, man.
And I thought, oh, my gosh, he's dead. And I don't remember who we played, but he threw 3 touchdown passes in that 3 days later. And the neatest part about it just happened a couple years ago. And it was the last time I was with Chuck Noll. And he died just a couple months after that. And I was talking about being a lineman and how we we don't call plays. We don't, we're not supposed to be the smart guys or something. And then Chuck goes, you mean like roping your quarterback and getting him drug around the pasture? And I went, this is 50 years later. I went, you knew about that.
Oh, man.
And as you know, Chuck, there was just this, this little greasy smile, and it was a neat thing. It was neat.
That's so 2 follow-ups on that. One, where was that in Steeler history? Like, had you killed him, would Steelers Nation would have missed out on, 3 Super Bowls? When was that?
Oh, that was, we had not won a Super Bowl yet.
Oh, my God. All right. So, wow, you would have ruined it all for Steelers Nation. Beautiful.
What's funny is while she was dragging him and I'm trying to catch him, I thought this is not going to work. And I'm actually thinking the humanness of us. I'm thinking, what are they going to do to me? Will this be murder 1? Could I plead insanity?
I'm glad it all worked out. You mentioned Chuck Noll, obviously a legendary coach. You got to play for him, I believe, your whole career. Everyone I've talked to that's gotten to play for him or coach just talked about how much they've learned from him. And I'm just curious, what was the impact that Chuck made on you? What was your big takeaway from sitting under his leadership for so long?
One of the things is you use the word leadership. And I think of leaders, Chuck definitely was a leader. Chuck's leadership style is different than anybody's leadership style that I've ever been around. So I think when somebody wants to, they're in a position of leadership, you've got to look at a lot of different people and bring in the concepts and the qualities that God created in you. You can't be a Chuck. No, there was only one Chuck. And my son Caleb is a great leader. Tony Dungy is another one that's a great leader. All 3 of those coaches, Caleb coaches wrestling at Pine Richland. If you watch him coach and you watch him after the match, you wouldn't know if his kid won or lost the match because he's going to coach with so much love. And Chuck wasn't a huggy-feely person, So there's, God has given us different qualities. But Chuck, he was a technician, which is I think that's the number one thing that I learned from him is he's a technician. He's a technician in football. I got to play for him for 13 years, and then I got to coach for him or with him for 10 more years.
Wow.
So when I left the Pittsburgh Steelers, I had spent 23 years with Chuck Noll, over half my life.
Wow. I'd
spent over half my life with Chuck Noll and the Rooneys and the Steelers and Chuck would say things. You come up the line, line of scrimmage, say, "You've got to gather information." He had these quotes, and he would say, "You got to do whatever it takes," And if we lost the game, he would say, "All right, today we're going to go back to basics." Those are just, there's a bunch of them, but those are things that Chuck would say. And he was a big guy on basics. And I think that gathering information sticks with me before I take off trying to do something. How much information on that can I gather? Now, if I'm playing football, it could even be looking at the hip tilt of my opponent to read, does that mean because a guy, if he's going to come inside, he's got to drop his hips just a little bit. And then you can read that. And that's an example. So you're gathering information. You want to do whatever it takes. So those are Chuckisms.
Outside of Chuck, and I don't even know that he was the most influential, but who impacted you most as your time as a player? I'm just curious, was it another coach? Was it a player? And how did they impact you?
From a coaching standpoint, Raleigh Dodge was our offensive line coach, and Dan Radakovich. Both of them were technique guys. They were so technique oriented. I remember Jerry Mullins. You have to be around Jerry Mullins. He's the kind of guy that can, no matter we had tough practices, and so you need a guy that complains all the time so that you're not as bad off as they are. And Jerry Mullins is getting inducted into the Hall of Honor, but we would think, did we lose that game the way they would be? The coaches would be on us like that. But Donnie Shell was a defensive back, strong safety, is a free agent, came with the Lamberts and Stallworths and Swans, came that year as a free agent. Donnie Shell would knock on my door at 7:00 in the morning. And I'm trying to get every last minute of sleep that I can, because I got to go out and have two-a-days. And I would get up and open the door, and he'd say, "Oh, great, you're up. I'm having Bible study down in my room. So come on down." And I wasn't up. But I would go down, and Donnie would he'd get his Bible, and he would go, "I was just reading this last night, and here's what popped out at me. Jesus is talking about one having authority. So I was looking up, what's that word authority mean?" And then he would go on, and so Donnie was a guy that lived his faith 24, still is. He called me, he'll text me, "Hey, John, I was just praying for you today." Just something like that. And then also Hollis Half was our team chaplain, and we had Bible studies on Wednesday nights that a bunch of guys came to. And then we did, he would organize high school football camps at Geneva College, where we would minister to high school kids. And I think that was so pivotal. I won't try to say that word too long.
Pivotal. I got you.
There you go. That was really a changing thing, because Christians, we tend to want to be served. And sometimes we don't get the idea that, okay, you've been to training camp, now go out and serve. Bud Wilkinson was the head coach at Oklahoma when I was a kid. They'd won 47 games in a row. He was asked, what's his definition of football? And he said, football is 40 young men running around on a football field desperately in need of rest. Being watched by 40,000 people up in the stands, desperately in need of exercise. And as Christians, we got to get out of the stands and get down on the field.
Wow.
And Donnie was one of those guys, and Hollis Half started doing that. He did the Sunday services for us. He did the midweek Bible studies. And then he started doing camps where we would go and teach not just football techniques, but have little Bible studies and stuff at Geneva College for high school kids.
Wow.
And 45-year-old men will come up to me now and say, "Hey, we came to your camp when I was in high school."
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a mutual friend, Jon Kolb, played for the Steelers broadcaster. Unfortunately, we just lost him a few years ago. A huge supporter of Light of Life. And I just remember him talking about you and basically your whole era of players, I think, were, the captains of the team, et cetera, when he came into the league. And he just talked about the impact that you all made in his life. I'm just curious, can you talk about how to make a difference? You talked about getting into the game. How can we as people of faith get into the game and actually make a difference in the lives of others? Is it passive and just being an example? Is it really intentional and going out and being aggressive? I'm just curious your view on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I think about a lot. And I wished that we as Christians would change the way we present Christ. Jesus died on the cross for us. Amen. I get it. Okay. I am saved through faith, not as a result of works, and no man should boast. I get it. But Paul, I hear that all the time from Christians. But Paul also writes, you show me your works without your faith, or you show me your faith without your works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. So I don't think as Christians we've been given a gift. The worst thing in the world, okay, anybody watching this, Romans 12 says you've been given a gift. I think it's 1 Corinthians chapter 12. It says we've been given a gift. James, the book of James talks about God has given you a gift. The word we don't want to die and not know what our gift is, and not having employed it. And in some of the places, it talks about serving, talks about teaching, talks about leadership.
I am curious. Do you have any regrets looking back at your career as a Steeler?
No. I have lots of regrets of things that from outside of sports, from being a coward and saying you should go up and talk to this person, and then I didn't do it. John Guest. One time, I'm at the airport, and we're flying out to play a football game, and I meet John Guest. He's coming off the plane, and so he says hi. I say hi, and we stand there and we're talking, and this little boy comes up, and he says, Mr. Kolb, could I have your autograph? And so he gives me this paper, and I'm thinking, okay, typically I write my name and then I put Jeremiah 12:5 on there. Your people can look it up. Okay. And I thought, well, if I do that, John Guest is going to think I just did that to impress him. I just put my name and my number and handed it back to the little boy. And he said, thank you. And the little boy runs off. Then John Guest goes with that English accent. John, I can't do that. You just missed an opportunity to make an impact on this boy for eternity.
Wow.
And I'm looking for a hole in the airport to crawl into. And so those are the things that God does things for a reason. I don't know if God's a Steeler fan. I don't think he's a Cleveland fan, but but he does have a plan for our life, and there's a reason for things, and so we've got to look and say, what is that reason? Why is this? And then take advantage of it. And I'm not glad that happened. It's a regret, but I can tell you, if you're out somewhere and somebody asks me for an autograph, I'm going to put my Bible verse on there.
That's so good. No, I think that's such a powerful story. We all get those promptings sometimes, and the fear comes up. So Thank you for sharing that. A few more fun questions. What do you think the biggest difference is about today's NFL versus the NFL you played in the 70s and 80s?
Well, somebody said the other day to me, and it's kind of funny. He says, aren't you amazed at how much stronger and faster the players are today? And I went, what? What? I ran a 4.6 540. Larry Brown ran a 4.6. Jerry Mullins ran a 4.7. Sam Davis ran a 4.7. There's not a lineman in the Steelers, or maybe perhaps in the NFL, that can run under a 5 flat today. They're big and fat. They're big and fat. They can't bend their legs. They can't change directions. Stronger, my best squat was 715.
Woo!
715 pounds, over twice my body weight. There's not a guy, I don't know for sure, but I'll bet you. Call me up, whoever watches this, and tell me if I'm wrong, somebody that can squat twice their body weight. Larry Brown, close grip bench press, 495 pounds. Like that, thumbs touching. Okay, I bet you I'll buy anybody dinner if they can show me a guy that can do 495 or 500 today. Well, no, today's players aren't stronger and faster. I mean, I'm talking linemen.
I love it. So, I guess I would be curious then. Do you think you'd be playing? Would you have been a tackle in today's NFL, or would you be in a different role? Do you think?
I don't know. I probably wouldn't have got a look because I was only 6'3". My heaviest weight was 258 to play, so I may not have gotten a look. We trapped. We ran trapping plays and pulling plays. Today they run zone blocking schemes. It's a whole different scheme. And the way they do it, you got to kind of be a big person because they actually take a step back, which is so un-football. Offensive linemen. That's why we're called offensive. We want to be offensive, but they'll take a step back on their zone blocking schemes. So it's just a different technique, and it doesn't fit my head.
One thing I'm curious, you won 4 Super Bowls, had a legendary career. And again, I've only known you recently, but you just seem like you have a humility about you that's so sincere and authentic. And, a lot of people may see you as, the legendary 4-time Super Bowl winner, et cetera. But you had pretty humble beginnings. How do you stay humble, and what did that have to do with your humble beginnings?
Yeah. I read a book. I'm trying to think who was the author. And they said nobody could ever write a book about how they became humble. I always thought that was cool. But I do think you have to remember who you are and where you came from. And so many of our guys, Larry Brown, went to school in Kansas, grew up in Florida, and was not allowed to play on a football team because he was black until his senior year. He got to another school. John Stallworth and a couple other guys have told me when the quarterback club would feed their team that before the game, that the white guys went in the front door of the restaurant, the black guys had to come in the back door of the restaurant. So most of the guys that played on those Steeler teams, they kind of dug themselves up, I think, and they remember who they were. I was allowed to go in the front door of the restaurant, but I sat on the left side of the bus and everybody else sat on the right side of the bus going to school. And the reason is because I fed pigs in the morning. We call it slopping hogs. In the morning. That's why I love the parable of the prodigal son.
Wow.
Because what does he end up doing? He ends up slopping hogs.
Yeah.
And so pigs do not live on dry ground. Pigs live in mud. It can be 110 degrees in August in Oklahoma. Somehow they live in mud, and mud has a property called suction. And when you feed your pigs, you carry these buckets across the pig pen, and they got pig slop in them, and it kind of pours out, and so the pigs will come in, and they weigh 300 pounds, and they'll ram their head in that bucket, and as you're trying to hold that up, and you take a step, suction will pull the boot in the mud, and then your foot comes out, and your sock comes down in that mud, and then if I'm late, I don't have time to change clothes, take a shower. I just got to go get on the bus. And so pig mud, I could give you a description. You can wipe cow poop off. You can wipe horse poop off. You can't wipe pig poops. And dogs, pigs is the epitome of it. That's what I remember. And that's what I want to remember. That's where I came from. Just like the prodigal son. And so just like a lot of the guys on our team, we came from places, and God has brought us to where we are. not anything I did. I got a football scholarship to Oklahoma State University. My best friend got a scholarship to Vietnam. They had a big dinner for me, 800 people in Oklahoma. For their hall, the state of Oklahoma has a Hall of Fame. They flew me down there. My buddy called me up and says, "Can I pick you up at the airport?" He said, "Yeah." So he's picking me up at the airport, and he's carrying my luggage. As we walk to his car, his license plate says Bronze Star. Bronze Star. And I got the banquet. Why? Because I played in the Super Bowl.
Wow.
And I said, "Gary, Bronze Star." Like when somebody says to me, "Oh, you got a Super Bowl ring." I said, "Oh, Bronze Star, what?" And he just went like this. And I said, "What happened?" And he didn't say anything for 10 minutes. When we got to the airport, he goes, "There was an ambush, and a lot of guys didn't come home."
Can you just tell people what you're doing today through ATP, what it is, and what you're doing, because it's remarkable?
Yeah. ATP, it's called Adventures in Training with a Purpose. I picked those words on purpose. Adventure means I don't know how it's going to turn out. Training, I hope there's some physical therapists here watching this, because they'll go, "Are you a therapist?" And I go, "No." And I didn't go to Pittsburgh Steelers therapy camp either. We went to training camp. And I didn't go to basic therapy at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I went to basic training. Okay. So therapists somebody has a surgery, whatever, they go to a therapist. That's limited typically by insurance. Because in fact, that's what really why we kind of started this, because we would do I was working in an orthopedic office, and we would do a surgery. Yeah, if anybody needs their hip done or their knee done, I've seen enough hip and knee replacements. I'm pretty good. Carpal tunnel, you don't want me to do that one. You got to have these special glasses. But we would do a hip replacement, and 12 weeks later, insurance would say you're done. And I would run upstairs, and I'd say to the doctor, "This lady can't get off a toilet seat. She can't go downstairs. How come she's done?" Well, insurance isn't paying. So when therapy's done, people, many times older people, what about people with Parkinson's? What about people with MS? What about people with strokes? What about amputees? Amputees aren't going to grow a new leg. And all of our amputees, I have 5 right now. None of their legs, the leg keeps shrinking, and so they got to go back and get new prosthetics. Those are $5,000 a pop. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be on a soapbox, but so ATP is adventure. I don't know how it's going to turn out. We're doing training, and we want to have a purpose. Just like, I think it took me a while to figure this out. 20 veterans plus every day take their own life. If you read Tony Dungy's book, Tony Dungy played with the Steelers, won a Super Bowl coaching. He talks about in his book the suicide rate for former NFL players is 10 times the national average. Wow. What's the common denominator? Well, it took me a while because I'm a lineman, but after a couple of days, I figured it out. Because both groups are in a mission, they have a purpose, they have a team around them. Somebody's got their 6th, that's Army talk, 4, I got your back. And then all of a sudden, you're done. You know, I do not know a single football player that said, "I'm tired of this. I don't think I want to do this anymore." No, we get to the point where we can't run as fast. Something's broke. Our fingers go different directions. Our noses are flat. That's the good stuff. And then we're done. And then you're trying to figure out, now what do I do? What is there out there that is as challenging and purposeful as going to a stadium and 70,000 crazy Steeler fans waving terrible towels, yelling? Well, serving people is.
Come on. And so is that, I was going to ask you about that. When you transitioned, you know, a lot of people would say 4 Super Bowls, it's not going to get any better than that. And I'm assuming, I don't know how old you were when you retired, early 30s maybe. Was that a hard thing for you to find another purpose, or did that take a while?
It was really hard, really, really hard. One night, I got these cramps so bad that I thought I asked my wife to take me to the doctor. I thought I was going to die. So she takes me to Divine Providence. That's, it was right after I got done or finished playing. And God is so amazing. So the next morning, they stick these tubes down my mouth and up the other end.
Ooh.
And so the technician that was running the tubes up and down, he comes in and he's like, "Okay, Jon, I'm not supposed to be in here. The doctor's supposed to tell you, but you got an ulcer. And the kind of ulcer you got is from being anxious and worrying."
Wow.
So the doctor's going to give you these pills called Tagamet, and they'll clear they'll clear up the ulcer. But he said, I read you are a Christian. So I'm suggesting that if you're a Christian, whatever's bothering you, why don't you give it to the Lord?
Wow.
And so he leaves. And as he's walking out, the doctor comes in looking doctorly. He's got these doctors, little Dr. Beard. And he goes, "Jon, and we're going to give you these Tagaments and that'll clear it up." And so I kept that bottle of Tagaments probably 5 or 6 years. And I finally thought, I don't need that in my drawer anymore. And I threw them away. But God brought that guy, his name was Dale, into my life and said, whatever's bothering you, And so sometimes I think God brings people into our life like that and we don't listen. If we take the time, he really has an angel usually or something in Scripture for us to connect with.
Yeah. I know we're a few minutes over time. Do you have 2 more minutes for maybe some fun questions?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. So, yeah, I usually do lightning round. I'll just throw a few at you. One, we didn't get to talk a ton about this, but you have, I think is that Mount Kilimanjaro behind you?
Yes. That's painted by an 86-year-old vet who was paralyzed for 50 years, and now he walks.
Wow. Come on.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful painting. One thing you all do is take people on adventures, which I fully plan to partake in at some point. But you go to Mount Kilimanjaro, you've been to the Grand Canyon. I heard you on another podcast saying you've whitewater rafted upside down over waterfalls. I always encourage people to have a bucket list. What are 1 or 2 of the top adventures you've ever had that you would say, hey, if you don't do anything else before you die, do these things?
Adventure, I picked that word because adventure means I don't know how it's going to turn out. To me, that's the definition of adventure. So, got it on there. Okay.
Come on.
Adventure means I don't know how it's going to turn out. And, so you don't know how it's going to turn out. One of the first ones, I think all the way back from being a kid, but I remember hiking across Newfoundland with my son when he graduated. And so it was the last day and there was a mountain. And they had their GPSs, and I didn't know. I mean, I'm old fashioned. This is when they were really new. I was carrying a map, and so we're eating breakfast, and I said, I think I'd like to go around the south side of this mountain, and it's the last day. And they said, well, no, let's go around the north side. And so I said, well, you know what? Let's take a chance. You guys go around the north side. I'll go around the south side. I know every day you plotted your course, I plotted mine. We come out in the same spot. So they agree. They go around the north side. I'm going around the south side. I'm walking through some willow trees. I'm 20 miles from the nearest person. I walked up face to face to a moose.
Oh, man.
Moose are 10 feet tall. And we're just staring at each other. And I'm, my poker hand right here, I don't have any aces. And I'm in these willow trees, and the bottom of the willow trees are this big. They may be 10 foot tall, but if I climb up there, you know, and so I start walking backwards, just I'm not taking my eyes off that moose. And he chose not to run over me. And later, 30 minutes later, I was going, whew, that was close. And I'm walking along the hillside now, and up on the hillside, 50 yards up above me, was a black bear running. And so now I don't want to scare anybody because I love your people to come do adventures with us. When we go to Kilimanjaro, I promise there will be no moose or black bears. But that was just one of the adventures in one of the first ones.
So, I mean, with the 750-pound squat, you were still afraid of a moose? You don't think you could take it out? Last question, I guess, just to end, and then I'll leave it open-ended for you, but would just be, you're towards the end of your life, looking back one day, what do you want to be remembered for, and what do you want your legacy to be?
Wow. I hadn't started thinking about that until you mentioned it. 10 days before Tunch died, he was still able, he couldn't walk very well, but he could run in our underwater treadmill tank. Because if Tunch weighed 180 pounds when he died, but in that tank he weighed 18 pounds.
Wow.
So it enabled him to actually run. And I remember going at his funeral. I was one of the pallbearers. And so we carried Tunch's casket over the grave hole, over the hole. And I'm claustrophobic. I don't get on elevators with 3 people because it's too tight. I'll get off and take the stairs. And I'm going, don't look down that hole. Don't look down that hole. And as I helped put the casket down, I looked down in the hole. And then they had the funeral, and everybody left, and I kind of hung around a while, thinking they're putting that casket in that hole. And for the next 3 days, I thought about Tunch being in that hole with that dirt on him. And I knew that the Bible says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. But nevertheless, and so his spirit and soul went to be with God. I get that. But the body was still in there. And then I read in Ezekiel, and it talks about when Christ returns. And it talks about this valley. And I was there when I got to go do football camps for Israeli soldiers, Fellowship of Christian Athletes football. So I'd mentioned that. And I was there at that valley. And God asked Ezekiel, there's all these bones. And he asked Ezekiel, can I put flesh on these bones? And Ezekiel says, you're God, you can do whatever you want to do. And so he puts flesh on the bones, but it's still dead. And only God can breathe life into a body.
Wow.
Somebody can die, and every ingredient that they need for life is there. But we can't create life. Only God can do that. And so all these bodies now have bones, have bodies on them. And Ezekiel says, or God asks Ezekiel, can I breathe life into these bodies? And Ezekiel says, you're God, you can do whatever you want to. And they all come to life. And I was cured.
Wow.
I still don't like to get on elevators. But so I thought about, I'm 76, you're right. I'm still healthy enough to fall off my mountain bike. I flipped over the handlebars twice last week. So I'm healthy enough. But those are things that, and I talked to Hollis Half. We talked the other day because Craig Wolfley's brother died, and I was at his funeral. And I told Hollis, I want my funeral to be like that. I want him to talk about how God puts flesh on bones, no matter how long those bones have laid there. And then he breathes life into it. And then he's coming to bring that back up. So that's what we do when we get out of the stands. We come down on the field and we live that way, you know. And I saw a guy, I don't know, it was a podcast or something. He had a rope, and the rope was white, but the end of the rope was red. And he goes, "This is your life, right here, that tip of that rope. This is your life." And then he starts pulling, and he's pulling this rope. And I don't know how long the rope was. It had to be a couple 100 feet. But he's pulling the rope, and he never got to the other end of the rope. And that left an impression on me. So you and I and everybody listening here, we're just on this little red tip. And that rope is going to run out. And how we live now can make a difference for light of life people, for veterans, for those people with Parkinson's, and also those people that are healthy, you know. And that's our mission. That is so much. They don't make. If you see a guy wearing a Pittsburgh Steelers Super Bowl ring, probably, now it's not 100%, but probably he didn't play in the game. He was on the sideline. Because you don't need, as big as those things are, you don't need a Super Bowl ring to remind you were there. You were there with your buddies, you know. And so what it's about is the little red part right now of that rope. You know, how can we get out of the stands? What's our gift? How does God gift in us? And what he gives, he will supply.
Well, Jon, I've loved our hour together. Thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for following God's plan for your life. Thank you for being faithful with it. Thank you for discovering your gift and laying it all out on the battlefield for Christ. And I just love that. And you got a lot left in you. You're still a beast at 76 years old. I still wouldn't want to mess with you. And I can't wait to see how he uses you in the years to come.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you.
Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Jon. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/395. And as always, leader, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this next year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups are simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together for at least 1 year on a consistent basis to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. For me personally, mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 8 years, which is why I believe every leader needs to be in a mastermind group. So if you're interested in learning more about launching or joining a group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds or email me at dougsmith@l3leadership.org. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and I'll quote Coach Anson Durant, who I interviewed last episode, who said this is this is candid. He said, "There is no better coach than the bench." Boom. Oh, leader, know that my wife Laura and I love you. We believe in you, and I say it every episode, but don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. We'll talk to you next episode.